board. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to Taking Aim at 2021, blending account-based and demand gen programs to drive revenue growth, and presented by Intelligent Demand and Topo Gartner. We are so glad and thankful that you're here today. Thank you for spending a few minutes of your time with us. My name is Mike Swaney. I'm Vice President of Growth Consulting at Intelligent Demand. I'll be acting as the de facto MC for today, and I'm excited to be with you, and you are really in for a treat. I know because I got a preview of what our two gentlemen are going to say today. I'm really, really excited to hear from them. But before I introduce today's featured speakers, I just want to share a bit of housekeeping with you. First and foremost, this is a live webinar, so we'll be engaging you and each other like the good old days of real in-person presentations. Remember those? I think I do. And we are recording today's session. It will be made available on demand shortly after the completion of the event, so you have a chance to view it again, share it with your colleagues at your leisure. And as far as questions go today, please use the chat box in your On24 viewer to submit any questions. We'll answer them toward the end of the section, but you can submit any questions at any time. So without further ado, I am so pleased to introduce our featured speakers for today's event, John Comyn, CEO of Intelligent Demand, and Chris Moody, Senior Director and Analyst at Topo Gartner. So John, please take it away.
Thanks, Mike. Hey, everybody. John Comyn here. I am the CEO and founder of Intelligent Demand. I've been working for 20 years in B2B revenue growth, if you can believe that. I had hair when I first started, which is a good time to mention 8-bit. 8-bit is another way of saying old, right? So I might be at 7-bit at this point in my career. But I've been doing this B2B revenue growth thing for 20 years. And the first 10 years, or on the client side, where I bet I had roles that were similar to yours, right? Head of marketing and biz dev, head of sales, that kind of thing. And then over the last 10 years, I've been on the agency side, where I founded Intelligent Demand. And if you don't know much about ID, really quickly, we're a B2B growth agency. That's what we do. Companies trust us to be their partner to help them design and build and manage and scale exactly the kinds of integrated growth programs that Chris and I are going to be talking about today. So one quick thing that's important for you to know. Galaga, the game Galaga came out in the early 80s. And you're going to notice that the presentation today looks a little bit like Galaga. When I was just a kid, my parents and I would go to this pizza joint in upstate Pennsylvania. And in the lobby of the pizza joint was a Galaga game, and I fell in love with Galaga. Fast forward many, 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 many years to last month, I bought an Oculus Quest 2 VR goggle thing. And I got to tell you, I think I like Galaga better. I'm just gonna put it out there. So with that said, I want to say let Chris introduce himself. Before you do that, Chris, though, I'm going to brag about you. You are literally one of the smartest minds in B2B marketing that I know. I really mean that. And I also know that you have a special relationship with old school 8-bit video games. So take it away. Introduce yourself, please.
I do. Thank you for the kind introduction, John. I'm Chris Moody, everyone. I am at Topo, which is now Gartner. So we are part of the Gartner ecosystem now. My entire focus in my career has been driving revenue from a marketing perspective. So similar to John, coming up on 2 decades, doing pretty much the same thing at a lot of different companies, except switching to the research and advisory side is relatively new for me. I've been there for 2 years. Before that, I was always a practitioner. Similar to John, I have a close relationship with 8-bit, especially video games. When I was 2.5 years old, I was diagnosed with leukemia and was treated at Duke University Hospital. So huge Duke basketball fan, first of all. But they did have a game room with Miss Pac-Man. So we would go and play that between the treatments. And after every treatment or IV or chemotherapy, whatever I had to go and get, my parents took me to Toys R Us to get a Nintendo game. So I had tons of Nintendo games from all the trips to Duke Hospital. And I started my first business renting out Nintendo games. Ton of demand, not so intelligent. I did not have a return policy. So lots of customers, but they bought games for $1 essentially. They just took them and never brought them back. Now my kids do have a little retro Nintendo right outside, which is cool. So I have 3 kids under the age of 9 and teaching them about Nintendo games, which is very different than when I would lose and throw the control into the thick glass TV and it would just bounce off. So different world now, but close affection and relationship to 8-bit as well.
Wow, man, that was deep. That was a deep cut. I did not know any of that. That's amazing.
Before you go on, John, we do have a question from Kelly about your Quest. She said it made her motion sick. How about you?
Oh yeah, no, I nearly threw up the first hour. I mean, you know, we're not talking about marketing. We're talking about video games right now, which is hilarious. But yeah, you know, Oculus is an interesting thing. I think it's going to change the world, actually. But what I'm here to tell you is that Galaga changed my world. There we go. Scene. Okay. All right. Ready to dive in. Chris, that was awesome. All right. So why are we even talking about this? Why are we talking about the blending, the balancing, the borrowing between account-based and demand gen? And I'll tell you why. So number one, literally, I was thinking about this morning. I'm having a hard time thinking of a single company, a single CMO or a single CRO who I know who isn't simultaneously doing some sort of a blended program, whether they realize it or are doing it intentionally or not. And so Chris and I were talking about this back in November, I think it was November. We were saying, you know, are you seeing what I'm seeing? He said, yeah. And we said, you know what we ought to do? Let's just throw some slides together, call it a webinar, but invite people to what essentially is going to be kind of me and Chris riffing and talking shop on the topic of how demand gen and account-based are blending together and how it's a good thing. And so we're going to go through the agenda, but right up front, I want to give you the big takeaway. Here's the big takeaway. You should absolutely embrace a hybrid revenue program that blends and balances demand gen approaches, kind of one-to-many, and more targeted account-based approaches. That's what I know. I believe that. I know Chris believes that. And what we're basically going to do for the next 30-ish minutes or so, 30, 40 minutes, is talk about what does that mean? What are the trends we're seeing? What are the tools and tactics that are separately used, but frankly more and more used between account-based and demand gen? And then Chris and I are going to give you kind of 7 big pieces of advice for how you should think about designing what really is your end-to-end hybrid integrated growth program. We're going to try to land the plane elegantly. We'll see in some key takeaways, and then we're going to make sure we leave some time for Q&A. Okay, so first up is trends. Trends we're seeing related to account-based and demand gen. Okay, so I'm going to go first, and then I'm going to throw it to you. Okay, Chris?
Perfect.
All right, here we go. Number one trend is I'm seeing an acceleration of account-based being adopted across small, medium, and large companies, across healthcare and SaaS and tech and FinServe. I'm seeing it everywhere. So that's the first trend, is account-based is proliferating, and the speed with which it's being adopted is accelerating. Number two, I'm seeing account-based increasingly being used not just for net new logo acquisition, but also for retention, for churn reduction, as well as cross-sell, upsell, land, and expand. Third key trend I'm seeing is what we just talked about. I'm seeing the either intentional or oftentimes not intentional, sort of inadvertent hybridization of revenue growth programs that are blending account-based and demand gen. And because that is happening, we're also starting to see just some of the natural blending and borrowing at the tools and tactics level. And then the other thing that's really interesting is I'm actually starting to see companies draw from account-based best practices to bring it into not only their demand gen program, but their brand program, to make their brand program more targeted, more effective, more personalized, and more interlocked with their demand program. So those are 4 things I'm seeing. Chris, I know you've got 4 as well. Why don't you walk through those?
Yes, so I completely agree with everything John just shared, first of all. And a few things that we're seeing in addition to that. Number one, which is number 5 on the slide, but my number one, most organizations do have, that's right, most organizations do have multiple go-to-markets. So we see account-based, we see demand generation or volume and velocity, whatever you want to call it. We've also seen a huge rise in product-led. That can be with a product without a trial, a product with a managed trial, or a free trial. We have tons of variations of the go-to-markets, but organizations are bringing different approaches for how they're going to go out and close revenue. Number 6 here, many organizations say that they are doing account-based, but they're really treating every account the same. So there may be this thing that's happening in some organizations where there's not a difference between the top 10 accounts versus the next 10,000 accounts. We need to make sure that as we tier accounts, we're building different programs for each tier. John and I are both passionate about that. We'll talk through it. But that can improve our demand generation and our account base. We will tell you how and why.
That's one of my pet peeves, Chris, is people who say they're doing account-based, but they're really doing demand gen.
Yes, and I am sure you inform them of that very quickly.
No, I'm very loving. I'm very kind about it. Yeah, keep going. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. And number 7, the push for a dedicated account-based leader does not always lead to strong alignment or communication with the demand team. We may have a leader that is focused on demand, where their world is leads and marketing qualified leads and progressing them through to sales development and sales. And then we may have a leader for account-based, which we would advocate at Topo and at Gartner. You need someone dedicated on account-based, but we have to bridge them together. There has to be commonality, sharing of best practices. We'll show you why. And then lastly on this slide, another trend that we're seeing, personalization, extreme value, and high-value offers are not just required in account-based. They are also needed in demand generation. So we have an intensity slider. Let's call it 0 to 10. If we go with our gaming analogies here, this might be the brightness on your television, right? You have to calibrate that based on if you're playing a Doom, something that's a little darker, or a Super Mario Brothers or a Galaga, right? We're dialing that in based on the size of the account list and the targets that we're going to go after. So we need to think through how we approach that. We cannot just say we're only doing personalization, adding value at every touch point, and high value offers for our most important accounts. We have to break down that barrier quickly.
That's great. And Chris, those sliders that you were just talking about, we're going to go deep on that topic exactly and give everybody really a framework for how to think about and how to apply those sliders in about 4 slides, maybe 3 slides. But let's pivot and go from trends and talk about tools. Tactics and tools. This is everybody's favorite topic. Why is it everybody's favorite topic? That's a different question. It's a whole different bottle of scotch. But here's what we're going to do. We're sitting here, and what we've done have created this great 8-bit Venn diagram, maybe the first ever. This could be the first ever 8-bit Venn diagram. I'm just going to say that. It basically shows demand gen on the right, account-based on the left, and then this big, beautiful blending in the middle. So again, we're focused here on what are the tools and tactics that are used solely by demand gen or mostly by demand gen? What are the tools and tactics that are mostly used purely in account-based land? And then when we build this slide in the next click, we're going to talk about what you're going to see is there's just a massive number of tools that are really shared. But let's talk about this a little bit, Chris. So on the right-hand side, on the kind of volume and velocity, the one-to-many demand gen, we see some things that are great. I'm glad that they're there. And a couple of things that I think might need to die, frankly. But one is wide net advertising. Look, every company's go-to-market strategy is a little different. But if you're in B2B and you're not pursuing just some tiny, tiny, tiny TAM, there's a role for wide net advertising. That's a demand gen one-to-many tactic and tool. I love it. All good. It's great. Another one is SEO. Obviously, really important. It's hard to really go micro-targeting on organic SEO. Another one is organic social media. But I think there are a couple of things that are on that right side that frankly could either be up-leveled or just moved off the slide entirely. Chris, what is your take on batch and blast email? What is your take on batch and blast SDRing? I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, well, batch and blast emails, if we're still doing that, there's a big problem. Another thing that we've always said in marketing is kind of the spray and pray approach, and we should be more sophisticated than that today. There is a place and a time where we can send an email out to everyone that's the same, but it should not be a primary tactic. That could be an announcement or something, but even that email should be valuable. We're not just randomly sending stuff out like we used to. So the terminology batch and blast, I would not apply that to a well-rounded go-to-market strategy. I would try to increase personalization, increase the value at every touch point. So that's one that I think we could kill off, take behind the barn, whatever we want to do with that one. The SDR batch and blast, pretty much the same thing. I mean, look, we are all trapped in our homes. Most of us are trapped in our homes right now, and we get bombarded by folks. And if it is not valuable to you, not only do you ignore it, sometimes you may even reply to that and say, hey, dummy, I don't even do that job. If you're getting something that's not relevant to you today, but we are allergic to that. There's no tolerance for it anymore, where maybe something was closely related to what we were working on in the past. We might give someone a chance to explore a conversation. That is not happening now. So our SDRs need to be more informed and more targeted, even if it is one-to-many.
Yeah. I worry that we're going to run out of time, but we get almost to a whole webinar on the use of forms and gating. But I just want to tease this up and say, obviously, I'm talking about online forms, gated or, forms on a web page or, whatever, a digital experience. My opinion is, as you begin to adopt account-based for sure, and as you begin to even do a better job with demand gen, your organization's reliance on forms for things like, oh, we have to get data about, reliable data about our contact or about the account. My opinion, it was always horseshit, and it was never high quality data to begin with. I think it always caused mediocre at best user experience. And now that we're in 2021, it's not that I'm saying we should ban the use of forms, because they have a role to play, but I think that we over rely on forms. What's your hot take on that?
I'll give you a quick one so we stay on time here. I agree with over rely. I may disagree somewhat about the time and place for forms if we think about the entire market. Now, if we're focusing on B2B tech, high growth SaaS, where a lot of us have concentrated, then I would say we should be using more sophisticated means and even progressive forms, and maybe not even gating at all if we already know who someone is by their IP address, right? So there's a time and place for that. But I think it does depend on the organization. And I would say definitively that marketers over rely on forms.
All right, we can agree on that. Good deal. All right, so on the left side, what are some things that are still really kind of mostly in the domain of account-based? A couple of call-outs. Obviously, when you're doing account-based, it's really important to have a collaboratively developed ideal client profile, right? ICP. And so obviously it's really important to use an account-based platform or a tool of some kind to validate your ICP and use it for account selection. So that's an example of something that's on the left side, right? Account selection tools, leveraging predictive to analyze, tons of your first-party in-house data to reveal what your ICP and the traits of your ICP are. That's a really good example to me of a feature or a tool that's on the left side of this graphic. Another one is lead to account matching. Lead to account matching, I think, is an example of something that right now I'm still putting it over on the left side, but I think it's already drifting over to the right. And the reason is because as you begin to do hybrid programs that blend account-based motions with demand gen emotions, if you're doing account-based, you have to. I mean, it's mandatory to correlate contacts and leads to accounts, right? You got to do that. But what I'm seeing is that it's even becoming like a really good idea to do that with demand gen as well. But for now, I'm keeping it on the left side. Anything else that you would say about tools or tactics or approaches that are still mostly account-based only?
Well, I would just highlight one. I've checked over a lot of third grade homework in the last year. Gosh, so much work. But if we drew a line from account scoring to lead scoring, like we used to do in elementary school where we were pairing things, we need to be pulling in a lot of commonalities there. So yes, they are diametrically opposed currently, but there's a lot of commonality in how we're thinking about that. We just may have more sophistication in some areas. That's the only thing I'd highlight in addition to what's here.
Cool. Well, okay, so this whole last 5 minutes of talk has been hopefully a little bit interesting, but it really is to set up this next piece, which is, and this is really the headline for this section of the webinar. The vast majority of tools and tactics and approaches that are being used today are in the middle. They're in the middle. They're meaning they feed, empower, and are useful for both a demand gen motion as well as an account-based motion. And I think that's really important. And there's some examples. There's some examples that I think would be good to call out that are the same tactics or tools, but we're seeing them being used in very effective ways in both an account-based context as well as a demand gen context, right? So here's a couple of examples. Content experience hubs. Everybody raise your hand if you have figured out and are using content experience hubs in your revenue programs. If you're not, you should consider it, and that's my humble opinion. We are seeing content experience hubs being used extremely effectively for one-to-many demand gen, one-to-few account-based, and highly targeted one-to-one account-based. So that's one example of something that's in the middle here. Obviously, marketing automation, CRM, that's a no-brainer. Those tend to almost be sort of core platform systems. Another example is the use of intent data. Leveraging intent data for both a demand gen motion as well as an account-based motion, there's a whole lot of good to that. And you can use it to trigger outbound integrated campaigns or actions to either a very large sort of one-to-many segment, a very tight cluster of accounts in a one-to-few way, triggered by an intent signal or a surging interest for one of your core topics, or a very, very targeted one-to-one. Anything else that you would speak to, Chris, from this big middle in terms of tactics and tools that serve both?
Yes. So I think anyone who knows me knows I'm going to double click on content. That's a huge piece here, compelling content. I mean, we both have a point of view around what that means when we say compelling content, but we need to be creating valuable, relevant content. Everything should funnel to high value offers. I think that's a huge opportunity for most organizations. I don't think most organizations are doing it extremely well, honestly. I think that's an opportunity, but it has to be connected to the integrated programs. And we will have multiple. That's the thing that everyone needs to realize. It's not a silver bullet where we're trying to funnel them to the one thing that will close. We need to think about it multiple times throughout the journey. And John, you hit on this earlier. I mean, we are talking net new. We are talking renewal. We are talking expansion. So when we think about that, what does that customer journey look like with integrated programs, the right kind of content, what the sales experience is, just thinking through that entire journey. I think that's what's really happening in the overlap here.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so if you believe, dear listener, if you believe what we're saying with this slide, and I think you should believe it, which is, sure, there are some tactics and tools that tend to mostly be used by demand gen, some that tend to mostly be used primarily for account-based, but the vast majority of them are in the middle. The takeaway there and the next thought should be, well, wait a minute, if it's not our tools and our tactics that distinguishes the difference between account-based and demand gen, what does distinguish the difference? It's not the tools, it's not the tactics, it's these things. And earlier, Chris, you were talking about sliders. This is kind of a framework that we use at Intelligent Demand. We call it the 8 pillars of B2B revenue success. That sounds very formal, but we think they're that important. And you can see where it says you can dial these up or dial these down based on what kind of a demand motion or go-to-market motion you're doing, a one-to-one, a one-to-few, or a one-to-many. So I want to call out a few of these. I mean, they all apply. And by the way, before I do that, if I were to give a marketer a piece of advice, it would be screenshot this slide or just get the deck when we're done and take this slide and print it and put it next to your computer and use it as a checklist before you do any kind of a campaign of any kind. Run this checklist and say, am I targeting the right people? Am I using a properly integrated approach? Have I considered stakeholder alignment in a non-shallow, non-silly, deep, a deep way? Am I leveraging data? Do I even have the right data? Or am I going to design a strategy that is not connected to our data layer and it immediately is going to fall on its face? Am I personalizing correctly? Am I leveraging more than just email, for God's sakes, right? Are we doing multi-channel, including human channel, meaning your SDR and your CS team? Have I thought about my measurement goals? And this is really important too. Am I bringing our creative and our brand and our message to life in a courageous way? So piece of advice there is think of it as like a checklist. So when we talk about sliders and, how do we dial it up or dial it down? 3 that come to mind: targeting, super important. You should dial it way up for account-based. You can dial it down for one-to-many. Personalization is a huge one. That is a slider that you should be thinking about in terms of the differences between demand gen and account-based. And then the other piece is cross-functional alignment. The degree of no kidding around stakeholder, I am on the same page, orchestration that is required for account-based is no joke. It is different. It is a higher level of orchestration than one-to-many demand gen. So these are the pillars. And when Chris, when you were talking about dialing it up, dialing it down, this is what comes to mind. What would you add, disagree with, throw up on, love, anything?
I would love to fight you, but I can't on this slide. I would agree with what you said. I would give marketers permission here. This is my virtual pat on the back to do the double click, to spend the extra time, whatever buzzword you like to use for what I'm stressing here. But let's really focus on integration and alignment. In addition to everything that we do, alignment is one of the most commonly misunderstood words because it's always been a problem, sales and marketing alignment. And I think we've assumed that it's always gotten better over time, and it has not. I think marketers build things, deploy them, and run away. And sales says, you didn't give me what I need. And then marketing says, I did. I just put it here, and then we ran away. So we need to solve that. That's one thing I would stress. It fits with integration and alignment. You have to do that to be successful. And then I would put an asterisk beside measurement as well. We will show you what we mean when we talk about measurement for account-based and demand generation in a future slide. But I'm extremely passionate about that. And the intelligent demand framework here with measuring and optimizing. To optimize, we have to measure correctly and effectively to identify the insights that lead us to the optimization. And I think that's something that tools aren't necessarily doing for us. So just double click on that, track to the right level of specificity throughout the entire funnel.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thanks, Chris. Okay, so most of us on this webinar, most of us who are nerdy enough to even pay attention to a topic like this are on a journey, right? We're on a journey to make our companies, to help our companies, to guide our companies to become more effective and more efficient at how it grows. That's the job. That's the career that we are in, whether we realize it or not. So it begs the question, what makes companies break through and grow? Really, seriously, right? I mean, it's important sometimes to lift our head up from the urgency and the craziness of our day to day, and say, what job am I really in here, and what does it take to transform the way my company grows? And the answer to that question, let's be honest, is a lot of things, and it's way beyond the scope of this, shop talk webinar with me and Chris. But if you were to ask me that question, we were just hanging out, I would say 2 things. One is, what makes companies get better at growing revenue is by applying those 8 pillars that we just walked through. Every time they go to do an integrated campaign of any consequence at all, stop and just go, am I applying the 8 pillars appropriately? That's number 1. And then the second thing that helps a company go up this maturity curve and get better at revenue growth is the topic of this webinar, which is get good at leveraging and building an integrated, hybridized, flexible revenue growth program that applies the right integrated recipe for the right revenue job. That's how I would answer it. So how do companies move up this revenue curve? Apply the 8 pillars and embrace a flexible, right approach for the right revenue job, integrated revenue growth program. So, Chris, I know you agree with that. And so the next section of this whole webinar is going to be Chris and I giving you some advice, like we were just, hanging out at a bar, talking with, maybe there's a cocktail napkin and a pen, and we're going to give you sort of 7 big pieces of advice for how to design a hybrid revenue growth program that delivers results, not in the year 2028, but like this year, 2021. And so, Chris, I have a question for you. Are we ready to break through meh? Do you click yes or no?
I think so. This might be an opportunity to do up, up, down, down, left, right, be a start to get some extra support here. But I will flag as we hit yes and continue. Lots of questions are coming in. John and I do have time set aside for that. We've even blocked our calendars with some extra time on this too. So we'll try to tackle as many as we can as we go forward. But yes, I would love to continue.
All right. Thank you for playing my video. By the way, you are like next level 8-bit guy. I'm a Padawan. I'm mixing metaphors there. Okay. All right. So here comes first piece of advice. First piece of advice from me and Chris to you on the topic of how to design an effective hybrid growth program is recognize and really deeply embrace that B2B is a team sport. B2B growth is a team sport. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I believe marketing at a minimum should co-lead, if not actually lead, that team sport. I don't mean that everyone reports to marketing, but I mean that here's what I mean. If you're working in marketing and you're not yet thinking of your job as not a marketing person, not an activity driver, but a growth architect, a growth driver, a driver of targeted revenue impact across the entire end-to-end life cycle of your revenue program. If you're not thinking like that and you're in marketing, I want you to think like that. I want to invite you up into that perception, because I guarantee you, well, first of all, it'll help your career a ton. But secondly, your company needs you to step up. And most companies don't ask marketers to do that. They don't. Most CEOs, I just can be honest about this. Most CEOs still don't know to ask marketing to step up like that. So you got to do it yourself. So that's the first thing. Piece of advice: really embrace that growth is a team sport, and I think marketing should quarterback that. Chris, what would you add to that?
So clearly I have some bias. I agree with you. I think I'd hit on a couple quick points here. Number one easy way to think about this. I have been in marketing roles that were leadership roles, and my metric of success that was predetermined before I started that job was a marketing qualified lead, or MQL number, and a percentage growth. That is not focused on revenue. We would want to stretch down to opportunities and pipeline. So there's one very quick example. Let's try to move one step deeper in the funnel. Even if it's only one. We're making it more of a focus on what sales cares about to start to stretch and grow. And I'd say with the rise of the CRO, or the Chief Revenue Officer, a lot of those feel to me, and this is not research-based, I have not pulled the data for this yet, but a lot of the CRO roles feel like they're built with former sales leaders. So the thing I would stress to marketers, yes, we need to be leading this. We can really help with this. But the focus on revenue means we have to be measuring and attached to revenue. So if we're stopping at leads, right, we will not really get there. We may get there in activities and the coordination and the integration, but let's really start to focus on revenue so we can have that conversation to show everything that we do. That's the measure of ultimate success for us.
Yeah. If you want revenue leadership, you got to sign up for revenue accountability.
That's right.
That's right. All right, killer. That's first piece of advice. There you go. On to piece of advice number 2. And this one is called Get Real About Your Revenue Goals. Now, here's what I want to talk to you about. If you want to get aligned with your CEO and your CFO and your head of sales, if you want a fast path to do that, do this. Take your revenue goal or your bookings goal or your ARR goal, whatever your company uses for growth. Put it at the top, and I want you to break it down into 2 dimensions. First is, how am I going to hit my total goal based on the number of new logos I have to win, the number of customers I need to renew or not churn, and the number of existing customers I need to cross-sell, upsell, expand. Okay, so now you've cut it into 3. Then you further cut it, and this is where it starts. What you do is you connect your revenue goals to your go-to-market. You take those 3 sub-goals, acquisition, retention, and expansion, and further break them down into account tiers. The first tier 1, is like your whales, the most important. You probably only have 5 to 10 of these in your whole year. Okay, tier 2, probably hundreds maybe, certainly not thousands of accounts are in tier 2. These are very important clusters of accounts. And then tier 3 is kind of everybody else in your TAM who you want to target. So why am I nerding? It sounds like I'm probably talking to you like a CFO. Trust me, I am not talking to you like a CFO. I'm talking to you like a revenue person right now. So here's why. When you apply the discipline, ideally not just with marketing alone, but you should fill this out with your head of sales, head of customer success as well. Once you do that, here's what happens. And this is the key. You realize, oh, wait a minute. I actually have to have a hybrid revenue growth program if I'm going to achieve this revenue goal. And the good news is it also starts to build alignment, real alignment, not bullshit alignment, with your sales, marketing, customer success, and product team. So that's that piece of advice. I can't stress enough starting with that. Chris, anything you would add?
I would just say one beautiful thing about structuring it like this, it gives us a framework and a way to think about how we measure success. We're measuring success in each of these 9 cells that are represented here, growing tier 1 accounts for acquisition, growing tier 1 accounts for retention. So that gives us this level of measurement where we can have an intelligent conversation about which things we are impacting and what we could do with additional resources or limited resources. Even with limited resources, where do we focus first? Let's show that improvement. Then where should we focus next? Let's go and do that. And oh, by the way, if you give us X, we can go do Y based on the success we've shown.
That's right. When you do this, when you anchor your hybrid revenue growth program architecture in this kind of a work, 30 days, 60 days, 180 days later, when they go, why are you asking me for more money for that account-based thing? You can say, I'll tell you why. Because 18 of our $20 million of our acquisition goal is only going to happen if we do a one-to-one or a one-to-few account-based approach, Paul. And then Paul goes, oh, right. Thanks for reminding me. That's why I need to spend that money. I just made up Paul. Okay, we're going to go to the next piece of advice, and that is once you do that last slide, which is you kind of know, okay, where are our revenue targets in terms of acquisition, retention, and expansion, in terms of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, you have a decision to make, a really important decision. Do you want to run your integrated campaigns as standalone, siloed efforts on an island from each other? You can guess where I'm going. Or do you want to put them together in a strategic, interrelated way? Guess what the right answer is, Chris?
I'm going to go with strategic and integrated.
Yes, you did it. No, I'm kidding. Of course. And I know that's like when you say it out loud, you're like, well, no, duh, John and Chris. Of course we want to do that. But at a lot of companies, this is not happening. They're not conceiving or even thinking about, let alone designing, their end-to-end revenue program as end-to-end. They're not thinking about it as like, oh yeah, the logos I acquire in Q1 become the customers I want to retain and upsell in Q2, Q3, Qn. They're not thinking about how important it is to connect their account-based and their demand gen efforts, especially when it comes to the tactics and tools, right? Remember the last slide? Several slides ago, we saw that most of the tactics and tools are actually shared. So by conceiving, by designing, by architecting, by running your growth program as an integrated, hybridized growth program, you unlock all kinds of lessons and insights and efficiencies that you will never unlock if you treat them as separate, siloed things. So that's what I think about that. All right, so this next one, I'm going to toss this one to you, Chris. So obviously, you would use account-based for more important accounts, larger accounts, bigger deals, but it goes deeper than that. talk to us about how to think about when and why to use account-based versus demand gen. I actually really love this slide. I think it's super cool.
Yeah, one thing that I've stressed over and obsessed over the last 12 months, when we talk about blended, it's not necessarily throwing it into the blender and mixing it all together like the Will It Blend videos from back in the day, right. Which were the first notion of viral that I can remember. But it's really thinking for various goals or objectives, how do we balance our go-to-market models to go and achieve that goal? Right. And I did see a question come in about limited resources and how to prioritize all the different revenue tiers. I'm not supposed to be peeking at them, but I had to. It's flashing at me. And how we would prioritize the revenue tier, or the example here is what is most important to the business. What's something that the CEO cares about? What's something that the top CFO would care about? That should dictate how we prioritize and slice and dice what we go and do first. So for instance, if we are trying to identify a new segment, so if our mandate is we need to figure out a new place where we are not doing business that we should be doing business, demand generation is going to be extremely impactful there because we can cast a larger net. Right. We can get it in front of more folks. We can. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. We can start to see who's attracted to it. So let's see, Galaga here. I do remember there was some shit that like pulls you into its orbit, right? Like the magnetic type thing, the beam. That's what we're doing with demand gen. We're trying to pull them in and attract them. Whereas account based, yes, it can still be successful, but we're probably not building target account list for segments that we have never gone and closed before, unless it's a new beachhead and we say, hey, we're going to go out and do this. It's a company initiative. So that's going to be more on the DG side. The next one, decreasing inbound demand. We see this a bunch, especially in the high growth technology companies. If demand has started to dry up from people just coming to you organically, coming to your website, consuming your content, free signups, whatever it is, we had rocket ship growth and now it's starting to level off. What do we go do? That's where we can start to pull in principles from account-based and run account-based programs to go out in a more targeted fashion and create more revenue, create more pipeline. Demand gen will always be there. We always want to pull people in. It should not go away, but that's where we adjust our intensity slider over towards the account-based side. Right. Next one here, moving up market. So if we are trying to close larger businesses, both are important. And you may ask, why, Chris? Why do you have two greens there? The reason, if we're moving up market, the companies are larger. We're trying to close bigger accounts with more stakeholders, with more buying groups. We should see an increase in contacts per account. We should see demand gen that's pulling folks in from that account. And we should see account base that's going out in a targeted fashion. So both are important there. I'm sure we'll probably get a question about that as well. But the thing I'd say is if you think about a Coca-Cola, an Oracle, a GE, any group you want to think about, if you did their org chart and started at the top, you're going to see multiple businesses, and we could probably sell to every one of those businesses. So that's essentially accounts within a master account. That would be the structure I would think about. And then lastly, the competitive takeaway. For most of us on this call, we are in competitive industries. And if we see that a prospect or an account we want to close is using one of our competitors, we should have better messaging. We should know exactly what to say. We should know exactly how to position it. We should know who we have as a client that migrated from that customer. That is an account-based program that we should run there. As soon as we see that, let's trigger it. So not as much demand generation there because it's very specific. We need to show tons of value.
Yeah, that's great. I like how I just really like this slide because it takes it one level deeper than just saying big accounts need account-based, smaller accounts need demand gen. There's actually a meta message that's running through this talk, I think, which is the reason to have a hybrid program is because it's a recognition that your go-to-market, your ability to hit your revenue goal year over year over year has a lot to do with you chefing up the right integrated recipe and putting it in service to the right growth goal. And so many companies for so many years have been doing the same recipe to try to achieve very different goals. So how do you actually operationalize that? Like in the real world, how do you get it done? The answer to that is literally kind of why I started Intelligent Demand over 10 years ago. And I know this is probably an ugly slide. I know it's a slide that's a busy slide, but we have spent so much of our life force at Intelligent Demand developing this. And what it really is, we call it our revenue growth framework. And I'm going to quickly talk about it because this is how we start to answer, how do you, okay, John and Chris, I get it, but how do you actually operationalize it? How do you design it and activate a hybrid growth program? So the first thing is that purple bar, get super clear and super aligned with your CEO, CRO, CMO, CCO about the corporate goals and priorities for, the year, the half year, et cetera. Really make sure that drives everything that happens in your growth program. That top layer that says go-to-market support or growth guidance, that's all about making sure that there is an integrated, aligned direction about what are the go-to-market and demand motions we have to put in place to which audiences, which product, which use cases, what level of cross-functional alignment, like literally, like what is my SDR team going to need to do with marketing? What is my CS team? How is sales going to work with customer success to do a cross-sell motion? All of that guidance has to happen if you want to run an effective growth program. Where does it come from? It really should come, in my opinion, from that growth guidance layer. And you can see what's listed there. I won't mention it to you, but we could go, honestly, we should just do a whole webinar just about this growth framework. But basically, it's that growth guidance that says, this is where I need you to focus. These are the budgets and the stakeholders that need to be in play. And I will make sure that you get what you need in terms of audience understanding, account targeting, again, budget, cross-functional alignment, et cetera. Okay, so that's the top layer. Middle layer are those integrated recipes. And what you can see there's targeted brand awareness that stretches across all of it. There's how are we going to create and win new logos? How are we going to renew existing customers? How are we going to cross-sell, upsell existing customers? And then on the left in blue, it shows you kind of your three primary options. We can use a very targeted, frankly more expensive one-to-one approach, a slightly less targeted but still targeted, very personalized one-to-few approach, or a more broad one-to-many approach. And by blending that's where those integrated recipes come in. And then the bottom layer is your tactical operations. And what this framework is saying is, for efficiency's sake, for shared best practices sake, for alignment's sake, you shouldn't have, in my opinion, a completely separate tech stack, completely separate organization working for acquisition, completely separate totally from customers, or completely separate for account-based, totally different from demand gen. I think that's crazy. And so this green layer are the raw ingredients that power the integrated recipes in blue that are guided by the go-to-market guidance in red, and they all ladder up to the revenue and growth priorities in purple. I know that's a lot. We can talk more about that, but that's the best we have been able to do after a decade of making it all land on one page. Chris, what do you think about that?
I think it's great. I'm really focused in the middle. That's where I want to go, the integrated experiences. I think that's extremely important, working vertically across all of these and pulling it together.
Yeah. Okay, so next piece of advice is back to you. Tell me about the old double funnel. Have you heard about the double funnel? Tell me about the double funnel.
All right, so I'm gonna cover the next two slides in 60 seconds each, so we have time for questions, and I can do this for double funnel. So the big thing here, we need to create a consistent but specific measurement model. When we saw the revenue tiers, that's one way we could structure them in a column in a spreadsheet. Every single revenue tier, how we can measure that. For account-based, we are tracking accounts. So you're moving target accounts into engaged accounts. For demand generation, we're moving leads into engaged leads, which you probably call marketing qualified leads. But after that, we're passing it to sales development to be qualified for sales. Sales is trying to create opportunities, and then we're trying to close those deals. So we have that point of unification. where things turn blue. That's what I want to stress. I want to say, yes, we have to measure them differently, but ultimately they line up in the funnel, and we can start to put things side by side in any data slice to see how it performs throughout the funnel. What are the best conversion rates and the worst conversion rates stage by stage, and start to optimize against that. That's what I would stress. When we talked about insights before, that's what I mean. Let's find where it's happening in the funnel, what's working, what's not, iterate, keep going forward. So that is double funnel. Happy to talk more in detail. And then we have another slide here, which is the second 8-bit Venn diagram. So we have broken the record, John, but we have to break down silos to get to the next level. So yes, next level, that's intentional for 8-bit video games. But if we have account based on the left again and demand generation on the right, we are sharing tools and tactics. We talked about that. There may be some differences, but most it's overlap. It's how we use it and apply it. We have best practices. When something works for demand generation, pull that notion and concept and content or whatever it is into account base, and vice versa. Let's pull that across and figure out how we scale something that works in account base. Insights, same thing. We have to take what's working and share it back and forth. So that should be common sense, but it doesn't happen a lot of times. And we're here to tell you that. We can both attest to that for many, many organizations. And then the last two here, if we move down, you'll see found new contacts at a target account. If demand generation brings in contacts from an account that we're trying to target, we want to move that into our account-based motion, because that's going to be a more tactical, more experienced with that account team that can go out and close that business. And then right at the bottom there, you'll see good fit, but not on our target account list or TAL. If we see that happens, like if a contact at an organization we were targeting moves somewhere else, we have a lot of information about that person. Let's push that into demand generation, even if it's not in an account-based program. So this is just showing how everything works back and forth and should be shared across our blended go-to-market.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, so those are your 7 big pieces of advice from Chris and John for how to think about and design and even start to operationalize your end-to-end hybrid growth program. We have now made it successfully to the key takeaways. I'm going to do the first 2, Chris. I think you should do the last 2. Number 1, apply those growth pillars in everything you do, knowing that you can dial them up and dial them down based on the right recipe or approach for the right job. That's key takeaway number 1. Key takeaway number 2, I want you to embrace the idea of a hybrid growth program it's that blue layer on the slide I just showed that brings the right demand approach to the right revenue goal and the right account tier. Really, don't run from it. Don't think you're doing something bad. You're doing something smart. Chris, what would you add for 3 and 4?
On 3, when we say an audience focus, it has to be what the audience cares about. And we cannot do that without knowing their mission critical priorities. All the best persona work in the world is still going to be a tiny bit off, probably, because things have changed in the pandemic. Let's figure out for each organization, what is their biggest priority? And then that determines everything else. The tactics, the messaging, the offers to use, how we package it, what's our positioning, all of that. It's dependent on the audience. And then lastly, orchestrate everything. The fluid transitions between all these different go-to-market motions, even between demand generation and account base, all the different departments in the organization, John's stack that he showed, moving vertically across all our go-to-market functions, everything has to be orchestrated. And speed and flexibility are the 2 words of the year for us at Topo. We've been obsessing over that, and at Gartner. We have to be agile. We have to be quick. We have to show value in 90 days, even if it takes longer for us. We have to find those quick use cases to add a ton of value. That's how we can go do this together to close more revenue.
Excellent. All right, Chris, we did it. Mike, I don't know if you're still on. I think you are. What do we have any questions? Because Chris and I want to do our best at answering some of those.
We do. Great job, guys. Thank you for just an amazing conversation and some great insight. And as you mentioned, let's jump into some questions. But before we do, just one quick note. If after today you've got questions about up-leveling demand gen or piloting, proving, or scaling account-based, or how to do a hybrid program, please reach out to us. This is what we do at ID. We think about this every single day. We'd love to show you how for your for your unique use case. Easy for me to say. So we do have some great questions here. So I'm going to try to get through some of these very quickly that have come in and see what you guys think. So first question, as a general benchmark, do you have any sense of account-based versus demand gen as a percentage of marketing budget? Top revenue performers versus everyone else? How do we look at that?
Okay, so the question about what percent of my budget should go into account-based versus demand gen? Is that kind of the essence of that question?
That is part one. That's correct.
Chris, how about I'll start the answer. You'll probably have a better answer, but let me go first. So here's how I would think about that. And you're going to hate my consulting answer, but I can't tell you there is not a single metric on that. And the reason is here's why. Every company, remember that slide where I showed your total revenue goal broken out in that 9 box? What I would recommend, whoever's asking that question, go fill out that 9 box, or call me and Mike will help you do it. But fill out that 9 box, because basically imagine you took your $100, quote unquote, $100 revenue goal, broke it down into those 9 boxes. What it's going to show you is some picture that is unique to your company. And it might be that, wow, most of our revenue lift this year, most of the risk, most of the opportunity lies in tier 3 accounts acquisition. Well, then if that's the case, you should be funding awesome demand gen more than account-based. But the reverse might be true. You might be like, wow, we need to go after whale accounts, new, and we have a real opportunity to cross-sell, upsell our biggest existing customers. That would indicate you need to push more resource into account-based. So I can't give you, unless, Chris, maybe you've got a benchmark. I don't know of a benchmark that cuts across companies and industries for how much you should spend, how much budget you should allocate to account-based versus demand gen. But what would you add, Chris?
So our data point is primarily high-growth tech. But what we have seen over the last few years at Topo, it was usually around 30% account-based, 70% demand generation. I will flag, John's answer is correct, though. It depends on the organization. But if you're looking for some stat or data point to use at least as a starting point, we've seen usually it's 30% account-based, 70% demand gen. But we do have some organizations where it's 100% one or the other. And that's the thing you need to understand. There's a slider there as well.
I will tell you one other thing is with the clients of ours who we have been doing demand gen and account-based with for year over year now, there's a clear trend, and the trend is pushing more into account-based, even if it means basically taking from the demand gen budget. So that's the second thing I would throw is that if you're brand new to account-based, I would not recommend putting 100% of your budget into account-based in the first time you do it. You got to learn how to do this. But over time, we see account-based absorbing more resources, even if it's at the expense of demand gen. Okay, Mike.
I concur.
I want to make sure we get as many as we can.
Yeah, several other questions here. This one actually might be for you, John. It kind of comes off the conversation around the revenue goals chart. So the question is, regarding the revenue goals chart, what does channel mean in this grid? Is that the product or business unit, or were you saying that channel is the one-to-one, one-to-few, or one-to-many? Okay,
so channel was relative to that slide. It's really about stakeholders. Is really what I'm trying to get at there. So imagine you've got your acquisition program. Let's just keep it simple and say acquisition. So this is the revenue goal I have for winning new business. And inside that, you go, these are the really large, strategically important accounts I'm going to use for account-based. And then here are the new logos I got to get that are kind of more demand gen, smaller accounts. Okay, so now you've got that clear. The next question you have to say is, okay, what is my integrated account-based recipe, that integrated campaign recipe or formula? What will it look like in terms of personalization, channels, et cetera? But it also gets to who are the human beings I have to collaborate with? And in many organizations, they go to market not only direct to customer, they often go to market through a channel partner, a strategic partner, or an alliance partner. So the use of the word channel there is recognizing that in many companies, they include partners as part of their go-to-market motion, and they should be included in the design of your integrated campaigns. So that's how we're using the word channel in that sense.
John, on the account-based pillars, another question, but certainly I think, Chris, you probably have a point of view here as well. From meh to wow, can you go a little bit deeper on how to be courageous with your creative?
Yeah. Oh man, we're gonna if you guys are interested, we're gonna do a whole session on just that. So okay, how do you go from meh to wow, and what is the role that creative should? So here's just a couple of thoughts, and Chris, I know you've got an opinion about this too. One is, can we just get really honest with one another and admit that the vast majority of B2B creative, B2B messaging, and even B2B brand work is horrifically boring. Okay, I just said it. Tell me if you disagree. Find me on LinkedIn or whatever. We can argue about it. I think most B2B creative sucks. That's what I think. So that's the starting point. So how do you unsuck B2B creative? That's kind of the question. I think it starts by doing some deep, deep thinking at your company. We call it the North Star at ID, which is, who are we? Why do we exist? Why do we wake up in the morning and come to this building or, this Zoom meeting versus all the other Zoom meetings we could go to? What are we passionate about? What are we uniquely dope at and great at? Get clear about why your company exists, number one. Number two, out and be courageous about who are the people on earth who are our best fit. Don't try to sell to everybody and market to everybody. Find out, now that you know who you are, find out who the people in your market, we often call this an ICP, who really, if they just knew you, they would be like, where have you been my whole life? So step one, know who you are. Step two, get really honest, brutally honest about your ICP. Step three, develop a point of view. I challenge you, I dare you, I double dog dare you to develop a point of view that is challenging and disruptive and scary to that ICP. Not scary, but makes them uncomfortable. Have a freaking point of view. It doesn't sound like everything else in your doggone boring ass market. And then if you do those pieces, those three pieces, know who you are, know who you should love and who would love you, and then develop a point of view, you are now prepared to do incredibly courageous creative. It'll just fall out as long as you have a decent creative partner in-house or with your agency. But it's the lack of those first three things that leads to we'll put together a competitive feature matrix and that kind of crap that no one cares about. Okay, I know I just got really passionate about that. Chris, rein me in. What would you add?
Well, I think the first thing I'd love to say, the larger the organization, I think the higher the perceived resistance to courageous creative. And if you were working at a large organization and you think this may be unachievable, it's harder, in my opinion, to create visually compelling creative, like this slide deck with the 8-bit theme. This is an example. It's a perfect example, actually. It is a theme. There's a reason. It makes sense. You can do this with messaging or with the content you create or the tools you create. So even if you're at an organization that has a huge brand team and you don't think you can get approval for it, think about how you add extreme value for your audience. So how do you exceed every expectation that they have of what the email looks like, what the phone call is, what the messaging is, what the piece of content is, what that experience is? That's one way that you can start to think about this. So how can we make the things we control more creative? But then I'd also say we have seen a strong correlation to brand-driven or creative-driven companies and how well they have handled the last 12 months, especially in the United States, because that's the majority of my client base. So there is a correlation to great, exceptional creative and product success. We see this a lot in high growth tech as well. So I would say you can probably make the case that when this is executed well, it should be a top-down business initiative, not just a marketer saying, hey, we have to be more creative. So get some alignment up and try to bring that down to say, we need to be better. Here's all of our competitors. Lay it out for them. Here's what they're sending. This is terrible. We want someone to see us and say, they're not like everyone else. That's the way that I would try to set this apart. And we work with, plumbing supply companies at Gartner, huge vendors, right? Huge companies that are not in this tech space. So It can be applied anywhere. You just have to think about how to stand out competitively and meet the audience expectations, and then go a couple steps beyond that.
That's right. Cool. Do we have time for one more, or are we out of time, Mike?
I'd love to do two more if that's okay, because these are really, really good questions. And the first one is one that I've had myself in the past, so that's why I want to hear what you guys have to say. But what are some good ABM approaches for beginners, plays, especially when you're working in this blended approach with demand gen? How do you get started?
Chris, you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, so I'll start with that. The first thing I would say is, to get started, you can make the choice: are we going to target a lot of accounts or one account? And in my opinion, I like picking one account to start. If I've never done this before, I like to go with the small, intimate experience that we can control a little better. Let's research an account. Let's get to know an account. Let's get to know some people there. Let's figure out what that means. What are their priorities? What drives them? Then let's see what experience we can create for that account. And then we can think about how we would dial back the sliders we talked about to make that more scalable. But I would start small and manageable, first of all. I would try to repurpose any existing content that you have and make that even better. And then think about what the experience with that should be. Is it bringing in a John Common? Is it bringing in a Chris Moody? Is it training folks on how to better present the information? What is the experience you're trying to create? Knowing that in virtual settings, in many cases, the person delivering the message is as important as anything they say, because we have to keep their attention. So those would be a couple starting points. And John, I'm sure you have a more comprehensive approach, but I'll start there and let you build and iterate.
No, that's great. Here's what I'll do, just for time's sake. We get this question like 100% of the time. And so what we've actually done is we put together, and Mike Swaney, who is emceeing this session today, has this. We've put together literally a start here, how to get started with account-based. If you're keeping it scrappy, you don't have 1 million months, you don't have $1 million, what would be some advice from Intelligent Demand to you is a great place to start. But it's comprehensive. It's all the things you need to think about. So I'll just put that out there as kind of a high value offer. If you want, reach out to us. We will send you that and go with God, and good luck. And if you need help, let us know. But I would say, let us just, we have a thing for that. Okay, last question, Mike.
Yes, last question. And that thing, really quick, just back to that point, John, is an account-based pilot workshop. But there are obviously a lot of materials that go along with that. So last question. Thinking about a mature organization with a great mass/consumer marketing department, but is moving up market, what would be, this is a great question, the top 3 or 4 qualities you, Chris, or you, John, would want in a marketing leader hire for this upmarket play?
Okay, so did I hear that they're actually kind of a B2C company? They're actually selling to consumers or so very small companies.
Yep.
And they're crossing the threshold into some version of upmarket, meaning B2B, and maybe even higher value accounts than a single consumer making a purchase decision. Okay, well, since I interrupted, I'll go. One is recognize that you're making the cross from B2C to B2B. And so the one thing I would look for is someone who has some amount of actual B2B integrated revenue growth experience. That's one thing. Second thing is, a second trait I would look for is I would interview that person around what do they think the role of marketing is. And if they give you answers that would indicate that they think marketing is the place where you do stuff, where it's activity focused versus results focused, I would give the person who is thinking about revenue impact and business impact higher scores than the person who just shows up and talks tactic. That would be a second thought. But Chris, what are some traits that you would interview for?
I get very passionate about this topic because, I mean, we need to improve the profession of marketing, all of us, every single person here. The first, I think, moving up market specifically, there needs to be intellectual curiosity. You need someone who can look at data, make sense of data, and figure out how to structure almost scientific experiments to test new things, measure it, iterate, repeat. Because there's a lot of that, especially when we talk about consumer businesses. The other, John hit on, the revenue or sales focus. I mean, I have told B2B companies specifically when they've asked this question that if you talk to a marketing leader and they don't mention sales or revenue in their resume or in the conversation, then you should not hire them. We have to build so much alignment to be successful as a marketer. We have to know how to work with everyone. So the play nice ability, you cannot put a jerk in a marketing leadership role and then be successful. I do not believe that to be the case today. They might be successful by themselves, but there will be people that put a bullseye on them and do not like to work with them. So we have to find the right balance of full, whole person that's coming into the role, that's curious, but can build the relationships. And then obviously they have to be experienced in marketing, but they need to be thinking about the entire funnel and creating revenue. And they need to be very curious and know how to run experiments. Those are two of the things I would key on.
That's awesome. Well, there we go.
All right. Chris and John, great job. To everybody that was on board today, those were some amazing questions. Unfortunately, I think we need to call it good for today. But two quick things before you head out onto the rest of your day. Just a couple of final thoughts. First of all, thank you for attending. I hope you found the content engaging. I think it was. So a lot of great questions. And we will make the presentation from today available on demand. So look for a link to that soon. And just a shameless plug, we will be doing a series of events throughout the year. So be on the lookout for additional invites from us. In fact, our next webinar should kind of help you understand how to begin to actually get what we shared today done in the real and the practical world. We'll share a little bit more around our integrated planning framework and how you can use it to stand up integrated revenue growth programs. And the date for that next webinar with the Topo Gartner team as well, is February 23rd. So with that, on behalf of John and Chris, thank you all again for attending. And we hope to see you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.